I'm curious to see what the turnout is going to be. I believe this is the first Twitter space hosted on my new Twitter account.
Yeah, good point. And also, I guess a bit of a shuffle not having a guest anymore, and we will hopefully get a retweet on it from the Rocket Pool account, but still having problems with that rogue bot at everyoneing whenever we whenever we use the Rocket Pool Twitter. So I think Dave's having a look at that right now, and as soon as we can get it fixed, we'll drop a retweet on. But regardless, I mean, we will eventually get recordings up on YouTube. I know there's a bit of a delay with that. I think maybe there's the two Singapore ones I still have to get around to doing. Got to say, the backlog is real. The number of people that you meet and the number of new connections that you get at a single event, let alone like the 3.5 that we did in 2 weeks. It's pretty overwhelming, but we're getting there.
What was the half?
We did ETH Malaysia. There's like a local, Ethereum community. They do a monthly meetup, and the story is Langers and I, because between two of the events we wanted to attend was the Formula One in Singapore, and the hotel prices went through the roof. So it was cheaper to fly to Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, and stay there for a couple of nights and fly back. And we just happened to be there at the same time that Malaysia were doing their monthly meetup. So they invited us along, and Langers did a bit of a presentation. I feel like it was a pretty good turnout. There were like 30 or so people. So yeah, that one not so much in terms of the like networking and new contacts and things to follow up on, but certainly the other three, Ethereum Singapore, Token, and Digital Asset Week, were very productive. So
Yeah, those first two were quite big on crypto Twitter and seemed like pretty big events overall.
I guess we're maybe repeating a few things that have been said on the previous two calls, but we are kind of waiting for Langers to join anyway. But I feel like Singapore got way more coverage than the US events that were going on, permissionless and mainnet. I think at one point, I think it was mainnet. I was talking to Langers about the coverage or lack thereof, and we realized at the time it hadn't actually started yet. But then, even when it did start, there was like no content at all. So I feel like a lot of people went to Singapore, and then surprisingly, Korea Blockchain Week even seemed to be very popular. We didn't get to that one, but I guess for people coming in from the US, it probably made for like a logical stopover on the way anyway, rather than, at least from here in New York, it's like 18 hours on a plane. I would much rather stop along the way. So if there's something happening in Korea, that kind of makes sense. But yeah, it does seem to be that with all the protection happening in this part of the world, that maybe attention has turned a little bit more towards Asia.
Yeah, I think I saw a infographic the other day that showed flows from different parts of the world, and the American flow has just been down only for quite some time now. And it's probably for the reasons that you mentioned, Gary Gensler's protection, quote unquote. And I think it reflected in the events. Like the Masari mainnet main panel was a bunch of government lobbyists, right? Whereas an actual conference should have dApp developers and the ecosystem as the focus. So I think the team made the right call.
Yeah, and then obviously the practical choice of either going halfway around the world or relatively quick for Australian context, like to Singapore and just 2 hours away in terms of time zone. Easier to kind of justify that. So I have this ping Lang to jump on, but might be held up. So we can always do our favorite trick of running the biweekly in reverse if it comes to that.
I had another question on the topic of conventions while we're at it. What was the core dev turnout like at Singapore, Malaysia? And did the team get to talk to anyone? Because I saw Vitalik was at Masari mainnet, but then I saw that photo of the team with Vitalik. So was Vitalik just like globe hopping?
I
And
think
just generally, what was like the core dev interactions like?
so. First of all, I think there were a few people that tried to make everything work. I think there were some icon layer people who were doing like overnight red-eye flights to kind of hit up both Texas and Singapore. So maybe Vitalik was the same. He did do the rounds of, I think, after his presentation of the different the sponsors that had booths there. And I say I think because unfortunately, Langers and I weren't there. We were off at a side event about MEV, and that also kind of leads into the second point, in that a lot of the events were actually about various side events or meeting people who were also there. Obviously, again, if we're talking about coming from Australia, it makes a lot of sense if you've got people from the US and Europe who are in town to meet up with them. So, for a few people, including myself, we didn't actually participate a whole lot in the events that were going on. Core dev turnout, I don't think it was necessarily huge. Ethereum Singapore had obviously Vitalik, as we know, and I think there were one or two others. Names escape me. I didn't certainly meet anyone. That was more I felt like a community oriented event, right? And then obviously Token is the like flashier. Really don't know how to describe it. I think just because I
Retail
feel like a
oriented.
yeah, exactly. Like it felt to me, not that I've been like a crossover with something like Comic Con or that kind of event in terms of the amount of bright lights and costumes and everything else. Um, which I don't know, I guess maybe serves their own purposes. But yeah, all in all, a worthwhile trip. I did actually, so when we turned up on the very first day, which was a Sunday, strangely enough, um, I think pretty much all of like there was six of us attending, right? Yeah, Joe was unfortunately still in the US, but we were just kind of hanging out near the entrance, and Vitalik turned up and kind of walked past a meter away, and of course I did a bit of a double take, so I did kind of get to see him then, but like no interaction to speak of.
Oh, I would have fangirled just seeing him. The reason I asked about the core devs was because of that tweet that Peter cannot pronounce his last name, even though there was a really in-depth conversation about this in trading. I'm not even going to try. Peter S. From the Geth team, the lead of the Geth team, tweeted out right around the conferences that he was going to be using, or essentially just wondering about the rocket pool setup process. So it seemed to imply that he was looking into setting up a node himself. And I thought that might have been the result of an interaction at a conference, but it seems like that's not the case.
Yeah, I remember that happening, and then there were, a couple of comments about like, oh, everyone's asleep. He's going to go sleep with someone else. As far as I'm aware, there was no interaction, but we really were quite dispersed, kind of going to different side events, and then Dave and Langers also had their own separate events to attend, and then a few of us would kind of man the booth for East Singapore or wander around a bit and talk to different people. So it was a highly decentralized participation. There may have been a run-in, but not that I'm aware of. Sounds like just a bit of a coincidence, but yeah, good to see regardless.
Yeah, Patches did his legendary support services by getting Peter the pertinent information, but haven't seen an update since, and hopefully we will. Cool to know that it was seemingly a spur of the moment decision by Peter. And it looks like we have Mr. Darren in the chat.
Oh, there he is. Hopefully he's doing all right. I think there was a bit of a bug going around in Singapore. A few people managed to catch it. I think
Oh, man.
we're both fine so far. Fingers crossed. But it sounds like a few people went down shortly afterwards from the team inclusive. So there's been a little bit of a slowdown there as people have kind of gotten back up to speed. But I guess when you get, I think was Token saying 10, 11, 15,000. I'm not sure, but like a lot of people in a venue like that, and then obviously flights home involved. It's perhaps inevitable.
Yeah, there's sort of inherently super spreader events. I also had the displeasure of catching COVID the other week.
That's not ideal. I have heard that it's like doing the rounds here in the States again.
Oh yeah,
Certainly the weather, as soon as I've turned up, has not been great. So there is that.
yeah. Oh yeah, you landed right in time for our tropical storm. Welcome to America.
Yeah, exactly. Quite the contrast, especially coming from Singapore, right, where it was like 32 degrees. Wait, what is that? 80, 85, 89, something every day, humid and great pool weather. Not that I ever obviously went to the pool because it was a very productive work trip and we were very busy the whole time. But, there was a pool there and you could
Right.
say that it was good pool weather. So, yeah.
Dreary Gary Gensler protected America. What can't you love about it? How are you, Darren? Are you in fact under the weather? Can you hear us all right?
No, I'm actually pretty good. Um, I've I think it glanced me at the moment, so I'm cautious because everyone else has said, "Oh yeah, it kind of glanced me," and then suddenly I I fell down like a sack of potatoes. Um, so I'm cautious, but I seem to be doing fine at the moment.
Great, great. No, we like to keep it optimistic in Web3 world, so. But with you here now, we can probably start with our agenda. As usual, we are going to be covering the bi-weekly update. Slight change of plans as we do not have a guest this week, but that's all right. There is plenty to talk about. Let's start off with some stats. In the past fortnight, the rETH supply has continued to grow, nearing 530,000. Mini pool count, likewise, continues to trug along upwards. We recently passed 25,000 and are still in that 25,000 range. And node operator count also continues to climb as we've crested 3,200. And just for a side note, on the number of node operators, Solana currently has about 3,000 node operators. So in some respects, Rocket Pool has the same number of node operators as the third most impactful L1. Uh, how does that land with you, Darren? How Rocket Pool is, in terms of adoption, in terms of node operator penetration, it's swinging with the big guys.
Yeah, I think we've got 3 times more their TVL as well. So
Really?
yeah, I think if you add up Avalanche, Cardano, and Solana, I think we beat them. So in terms of TVL, not that it's that massive of a competition, but yeah. So I think we're quite ahead on that front. But it's good to see on the front. It's good as well. I think it probably goes to show how big the ecosystem is with Ethereum, though. Probably more than anything. Ethereum is such a large ecosystem that we're a relatively decent player in the space, but it makes us very big compared to kind of like on other chains.
In terms of rankings, even within Ethereum, Rocket Pool has been doing fantastically. It is now neck and neck for the 5th spot in terms of total amount staked by any protocol.
I'm not hearing Jasper.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can hear Jasper. I can hear Langers. I don't know if it's to do with me dropping out and coming back in, but maybe.
Hello. I'm kind of hearing you every now and again.
Maybe this is an Aussie broadband thing. I'll just message Langers quickly to say maybe he can leave and rejoin, and fingers crossed that fixes it.
Yeah, but as I was saying a moment ago, Rocket Pool currently is top 5 for amount of ETH staked, which is tremendous. The people ahead of us are only Lido, Coinbase, Binance, and escapes. Oh, I believe Kraken is still neck and neck ahead of us. So it's incredible the growth that Rocket Pool has accomplished.
Yeah, and obviously with Kraken, we will be no doubt gradually catching up to them. Or I think, as someone put it, probably in trading, what's pretty funny is they're catching up to us. But yeah, it won't be long until there's like that kind of fifth place goes to. But hopefully, as we always say, that there's more decentralized protocols and operators that make their way up to the top, because it's a burden to be kind of carrying alone, and it's better for everyone if that's shared a little bit.
Yeah, we always welcome a diversity. We don't want any monopolistic actions. So anyway, let's move on into the nitty-gritty, actual updates. We start with the smart node. Version 2 has had development continue, with Joe having dropped numerous details, little breadcrumbs in the Discord. So you can check out if you want to get a sneak peek on what V2 will include. But to summarize, V2 is in a complete rewrite of the smart node. Joe, with all his accumulated experience having developed and maintained the smart node, is essentially been given free reign to design it the way he would from scratch. So it will be the most comprehensive update to the smart node ever, and include a lot of fun new upgrades to improve node operator experience and enable some new things for the protocol, perhaps even a web browser UI.
Yeah, so version 2 is very exciting. Joe's been working on it really hard. So the improvements he's made are fantastic, and I think you'll notice a difference as soon as you start using the smart node CLI. You'll notice a difference, because particularly like performance wise, it's going to be so much better. So that's definitely something to look out for when that release kind of comes out. But yeah, there's a whole heap of stuff that's kind of like just factored out in a better way, so that other stuff can be plugged into it. Particularly kind of providing like a bit of an API for other things to be built on top of the smart node stack, so that you can do things like extra UIs and all of that sort of thing. So that's going to be very, very cool. We're trying to figure out how we slam those two things together and get version 2 out, as well as kind of like progressing the stuff we need to do for Houston. That's a bit of a challenge at the moment, but we're kind of like working towards that, and we'll slam those two things together so that we can actually launch it.
Right, that's going to be an exciting update. It seems that Dencun will not be launching this year, and will probably be launching early next year. So that does give the team some working room. In terms of...
I wasn't counting on it being this year.
Yeah, it was actually pretty interesting to see that dichotomy form between the core devs, the people around the core devs that hang out, and the wider ecosystem. It feels like there's been a larger gulf of understanding than there usually is, where there was this expectation that we would see Dencun like as early as potentially October. And that persisted for a long time, which to some people seemed erroneous for a while now. But yeah, that's just the nature of estimating in the Ethereum upgrade process, which is very wish-washy to the benefit.
Yeah, when I spoke to, because I obviously we try and track it as much as possible, so that we know where our kind of like releases can land and all that sort of thing. And when I spoke to a couple of core devs, and they certainly weren't as optimistic as a lot of the commentators were. And it seemed to be. I think also, now that we've seen how the releases work with Ethereum, we get a kind of a bit of a sense of it now. So I think when I spoke to some of the core devs previously, it was about the same timing as last time I spoke to them, but they were a little bit further behind. So it was interesting. So I think early next year is definitely or Q1 definitely. But yeah, that seems about right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And from the perspective of the core devs, they really probably don't want to mess up 4844, which has been built up for so long now. So getting it right is definitely more important. There was a piece of bread that Joe gave out in the Discord that I wanted to touch on, and he mentioned that they might be getting some assistance of some kind or some cooperation with the node set team on the smart node. I was wondering, is there anything you could add to that, or is that more of a Joe question?
Sorry, collaboration with you. It broke out a little bit.
Node set, Node Operators Association.
Gotcha. Yes. So, we're working with them closely, mainly really to support them. So NodeSet is one of the first things that's really kind of built on top of Rocket Pool. I mean, sorry, there are other things that are kind of integrate with Rocket Pool, but they do it in a the footprint of the integration is quite small. NodeSet has a much larger footprint in terms of the integration, so we're definitely mindful not to mess them up, so that they can kind of achieve what they want to achieve. And so yeah, we're definitely working kind of closely. Joe's connected with a developer on their side, and we've been kind of going through a little bit. We've been definitely in kind of regular contact with them to keep things moving along from both sides.
Amazing. Yeah, working closely with NodeSet is going to be awesome for enabling just a wider adoption of Rocket Pool. Another thing he teased at was the inclusion of an auction command in the smart node proposal for the PDAO. I believe this is related to Kane's design for voting. Do you know how this will connect? Is this going to be how, from the smart node, the entire governance process will take place?
Yeah, so that specific thing is to do with like the auctioning of like slashed kind of RPL. So if in a Black Swan event, if RPL is kind of like slashed, but actually the auction system itself will probably will say bye-bye at some point, because there's a when we redo for potentially when we do Saturn, it'll kind of go. But at the moment, it's still there because it's needed for now. But in terms of the mechanism, in terms of the PDAO mechanism, yes. So there'll be kind of like this way for any PDAO member essentially to raise a proposal to change a parameter. Obviously, there's constraints in that sense, because you have to put up a bond. And because obviously you don't want to waste the PDAO kind of like time, and then once the kind of proposal has been accepted, there's kind of a whole process of it being accepted. But once it's been accepted, then it goes up for vote essentially, and then if it gets quorum, then it passes, and the parameters change. But if there's no quorum, then obviously it doesn't pass. So yes, that's essentially. So it's similar. It's kind of similar to the ODAO kind of process, but there's kind of like an extra bit, which is like there's a challenge process where just the way it works. When you submit a proposal, you have to submit the total amount of RPL that's staked within Rocket Pool. We do that because we don't actually track that metric easily within the protocol, because it adds to the gas costs and all that sort of stuff, and it's also very tricky to calculate. Right, if we calculate it on chain, we did this previously, and it causes some undesirable UX issues within the protocol. So we removed the tracking of that. But when you submit this proposal, you submit the total amount of RPL, and there's actually like a challenge process that just makes sure that is actually correct. And it's very, very similar to how, well, it's a similar mechanism to like an optimistic rollup, where there's like a challenge period, and the proposer can be challenged on that, and they can, if they put up something that's incorrect, then they can lose their bond. But otherwise, as long as it's all kind of calculated correctly, then the bond is fine, and the proposal goes forward for voting for the PDAO. That was quite a long-winded explanation.
No, that was good. That was good. Very detailed and informative. One question I still have, though, is the major anti-spam mechanism then the inclusion of the bond?
Yes. Well, yes. There's two actually. So there's inclusion of the bond, but there's also the fact that so the PDAO can actually vote to reject and slash the bond as well. So you put up the bond, and if it fails, then you kind of get your bond back. But if you're spamming, the main thing is the bond. So you have to put up a bond which is actually an RPL bond, and you put up the bond, and but the ODAO, if they see you're kind of like spamming, they can actually stop that by punishing your bond.
So is this the ODAO or the PDAO that can vote to slash it?
The PDAO.
Got it. Okay, got it. I thought you said ODAO for a second there. Sweet. That sounds like a very useful anti-spam mechanism. Has there been any thought given towards the size of the bond?
I'll have to double check with Kane. I don't know if we've settled on a number. I think that was going to be up for kind of discussion with the RPIP. The RPIP actually, so the RPIP for this is drafted. I think we've gone through one round of like feedback. I think Kane is just finishing off one kind of element of it, which is it's kind of like this Security Council kind of element. Once that's kind of nailed, the basically the RPIP will be complete, and we'll put it up for we'll try and put it up as early as we can for discussion and that sort of thing. So I think Kane's already kind of like put out this design paper, which is basically what the RPIP is based on. So he already kind of put that out so that people could see it and comment on it and all that sort of thing. But we'll put it up formally for RPIP discussion very, very soon. The other thing we've been working on are the other two RPIPs. One is stake ETH on behalf of, which allows currently it allows the withdrawal address to be able to stake ETH on behalf of a node. And then the other one is the RPL withdrawal address. So there'll be like a primary withdrawal address, and then you'll be able to set like an RPL withdrawal address. So by default, all the ETH and RPL rewards go to the primary withdrawal address. But if you set this RPL withdrawal address, then the RPL part of that actually goes to a separate address. So there's a whole kind of rationale section in there. I don't want to kind of like rehash a lot of it now, but those two as well are in draft. We've kind of gone through a round of feedback with like the RPIP editors, and then we'll kind of put that out for discussion and that sort of thing so that we can progress that.
Great. I mean, I think these are both wonderful additions, and the Kane research posts have been very informative. So most things should not come as a surprise, or anything really. As for the size of the bond, I personally have no idea. Different protocols have different amounts, so I'm sure someone will do a comparison with the other protocols, and we'll land on a proper size. It's also interesting that Rocket Pool has a bit of a built-in anti-Sybil or anti-spam mechanism, in that you have to run a validator to participate to begin with. And so there's already some barrier to entry there. compared to most other protocols where, in theory, you could just borrow the tokens from a lending protocol and put out your proposal. So much more involved in Rocket Pool. But moving on from the smart node now, for people running block native, be informed that their MEV boost relay is being sunsetted. You have to switch to a different relay, otherwise you will not be earning any bonus MEV rewards. It's unclear why they're turning it off. I believe due to costs. They have a Twitter post that goes into details, but if you are running if you're running the block native relay, start looking to switch. On this topic, it has coming back into vogue, the idea of censorship from the PBS system. So although relay censorship has continued to drop from its highs of like 90% when Flashbots first enabled censorship, is down to 23%. Builder censorship has steadily increased over time and has now eclipsed 80%. So that's somewhat of a worry. The builder side of things seems to be tending towards censorship, whereas relayers with their lower barrier to entry have been tending away. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think that there's definitely been some. So the idea is that the validator set should be as decentralized as possible, so and as censorship resistant as possible. The reason why it's important the validator set is that, but we don't really care too much about the builder set, is because the validators can then enforce certain things. So one of the things that they're kind of like looking at is like inclusion lists and all that sort of thing, to ensure that these transactions do get in. I don't know whether I don't know some of the ramifications of that. I doubt whether we'll get empty blocks or anything, or empty slots, but we'll have to kind of like look at that. But I think that was kind of like the key to it. The key to it was that as long as we have a decentralized validator set, then it means that consensus can kind of they have control, and they can not force necessarily, but they can certainly guide builders into not censoring. So it really is hard though for those builders are in jurisdictions that have those issues, and I guess diversity in the builder set is important as well. Is still important, because ultimately we need them to build blocks, but then validators can build blocks locally if they don't get them from like MEV relays, and I think that's the key. I think that's where it's leaning towards. That's why there's been this kind of push to have MEV, but also have the option to build blocks locally, so that we can so that we don't censor essentially, or at least we minimize so some of it comes down to how long it takes a censored block to get in, and a lot of the time it's not that bad, but it obviously could be better.
Yeah, definitely agree there. And as you mentioned, CR list, there's also things like encrypted mempool that should also help alleviate some of the concerns around people in jurisdictions where some of these activities are illegal and they don't want to be aware exactly of what's going into the block. So if they had a way to build it without exactly being aware that it's a censored thing, then they've alleviated some of their liability. So it seems like there's a wide set of solutions that are being worked on. And speaking on work, with the team now back from Singapore, I'm curious what the major priorities in the coming few weeks for the team are in terms of development.
So the major themes that we've got at the moment are Houston is definitely the major kind of theme. Joe and Kane are working through that at the moment to kind of like to get the smart node and the contracts kind of aligned. So that's definitely a major theme, and mainly because we've got audits mid November. So we need to ideally, well, we definitely need to have it code complete, but we also ideally need it to be on a DevNet, kind of like with a bit of testing, before it goes to audit, so that we know that it's in a pretty stable state. So that's the first thing. We've also got, as Joe's working on V2 as well, so he's kind of doing that in parallel. He's got quite a lot on his plate at the moment, but he's also got Holsky as well, the Holsky regenesis, which I believe is this week. I haven't kept up with it completely, but I think Joe said it was this week. So they've got the Holsky regenesis, which basically just means that we're going to put support in the smart node stack for Holsky. That's because, well, we're going to be spinning up like a DevNet pretty soon to be able to test the Houston stuff, and then eventually we will move the entire testnet to when I say move, like recreate the testnet on Holsky. So there'll be so there's like an internal DevNet that we'll use, although the DevNet actually will probably open up to other people as well. It will be like an early stage, so bear with us. But yeah, we'll probably open up the DevNet as well as a full testnet on Holsky, so that the DevNet will be Houston code, and the testnet will be Atlas code. So all the current stuff that's on mainnet. So yeah, that's a fair amount of work there. We're also the other stuff is around. Nick's finishing off he's working with Sleedy on the website redesign. That we're kind of slowly putting those kind of illustrations in. We're starting the process of letting people kind of like see that, although at a very kind of like, we want to kind of do it in a controlled manner, but we do want to get a little bit of feedback on that. So that's definitely happening as well. He's also finished, or pretty much finished, the rETH reward calculator kind of API stuff. So I think we just need to kind of like review that and get that out. The other things we've been working on are, so the RPIP4 kind of like discussion. We've been kind of testing out snapshot dual strategy voting so that we can kind of resolve that issue with RPIP4 in terms of the vote weight kind of like discussion. And then a whole heap of governance stuff. So yeah, the main themes are really around kind of like Houston, the website redesign. There's a whole load of stuff going on, bubbling in the background as well, like cross-chain or kind of like cross-chain strategy. There's a little bit of that bubbling around, which Grant's kind of getting into, and that I want to speak to the IMC about. There's the list of people that we spoke to in Singapore is massive, so we're trying to like pull all of that together so that we can coordinate some follow-ups and that sort of thing as well. So there's a fair amount going on.
Right. So on Joe, real quick, the Haleshki, I don't think we mentioned that the Rocket Pool community is contributing to the new long-standing testnet that'll be running on Ethereum, called Haleshki, which is taking over for. Is it taking over for Gurley or Sepolia?
The testnet.
Yeah.
The testnet will be on Holsky.
Right. Is it replacing Gurley or Sepolia?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So as such, it's fairly important because a ton of activity used to happen on Gurley. So much so that the token near the end of the testnet's life actually gained value. So there is a very important public good to help maintain the testnet, especially because the devs will be using them before they update mainnet. It's just awesome to see Rocket Pool contributing towards this public good for Ethereum development. So shout out Joe, and especially shout out all the people in the community who are contributing by running Haleshi nodes, which is, from what I've seen, quite the task. So much so that they're having to regenesis. The first attempt didn't work, despite the best efforts. I believe at one point, one of our members, who's also a Lido node operator, whose name escaped, Crypto Manufacturer, was the sole proposer on Haleshi V1, and is now one of the remaining people supporting Haleshi Classic. So yeah, just once again, shout out to those people helping make Haleshi a thing. As for
Haleshi Classic,
isn't that great?
Win marketing.
Yeah. So the reward calculator API is one that is surprisingly tricky, and I'm glad to see getting developed. I think just today someone in the Discord was asking for it. And RPIP 4, although might seem pointless or overly bureaucratic, is actually quite important, and it signals to the wider ecosystem that we care about getting things right and rectifying even minor errors. So glad to see that coming along. Also, so that the other RPIPs that are somewhat bubbling in the background can make their way to light. Speaking of which, governance world, unless there was anything else you wanted to cover in terms of R&D?
No, all good.
Yep. Probably up next on the docket, or one of the next RPIPs post RPIP 4 voting, will be around RPL voting power. Specifically, what the max effective cap should be. Sorry, this is just a discussion around RPL voting power. The RPIP 4 is about accepting 0 to 10%, correct?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. After that, will probably come the discussions around RPL rewards and staking. Valdorf and numerous others have put quite a bit of detail into creating documentation summarizing that debate, which I encourage people to look into, as it is fairly substantive. I would think at one point you mentioned the team was looking to put out some kind of response on the tokenomics front. Is that still on the back burner, or has that been posted and I missed it?
No. I think with Singapore and Confluent and everything else, that's not been possible. Yeah. I think we're also kind of probably gun shy from like last time we put out stuff. So no, and we're also kind of trying to be as open minded as possible. So yeah, I think there's a few things going there. A, like capacity. B, we're trying to be as considered as possible, because there's a lot of effort and a lot of consultation on that. So we want to be as as open as we can. But yeah, so there's a few things there, I think, and we probably, to be honest, we probably won't like comment on it, and we'll kind of like see how the discussion goes.
I got it. Yeah, I imagine the discussions will start picking up again once it gets higher in the RPIP queue, so to speak. In terms of the GMC, discussions were ongoing about the idea of potentially introducing a GMC member stipend. the idea of stipends for committee members is one that has been discussed quite a bit in Discord and on the forum, and I look forward to this discussion maturing, as I personally view certain positions as requiring enough work to warrant a carrot in order to get good outcomes or ideal outcomes for the protocol. So glad to see that going on.
Yeah, it's funny. It's funny how we're kind of like rebuilding democracy from the ground up, and like,
yeah.
and so it's like, oh, okay, so suddenly now we need a paid bureaucracy. Yeah, I know. It's like I'm not. There's no judgment or anything, but it's because we're kind of like doing it from first principles, which I think is awesome. It's a really kind of interesting and exciting aspect of working on Rocket Pool.
Yeah, I think it's been a lot of minimal viable governance. There's a strong tendency to try to rely on community development when possible. I think that was like the wishful thinking behind the GMC IMC originally, but as time has progressed, it seems clear that with the size and scope of Rocket Pool, there is need for full-time staff. I mean, we saw Schifrin now as the GMC administrator, which I think is wonderful and has already had a market increase on the effectiveness and productivity of the GMC. From an outside perspective, it's hard, obviously, for me to say anything factually as I'm not on the GMC. Shout out Whack listening in, who is on the GMC. Oh, and Schifrin is listening. Shout out all the GMC members. Thank you for the work you guys are doing.
Yeah, I think it's. I think the hard part. So I think the reason why we kind of the wishful thinking kicks in is because you don't want to change the. So when people do it for passion and love, it's a very different thing, and adding money into it can just change the dynamic slightly. So I think as long as we can kind of like keep the spirit, but obviously. It's not necessarily rewarding, but definitely paying people for the time that they spend. Because people spend an awful lot of time on Rocket Pool stuff, and it's not. We really do need to kind of pay them for that. But I think as long as it doesn't change the dynamic too far, would be the only worry.
Yeah, I completely echo that. I think in some respects we were fortunate to do it this way because the people who applied in the first round, knowing there was or not expecting any profit, did it, as you said, out of pure passion. And now introducing a salary, well, we've kind of picked out the passion, and now we can try to entice a little bit more. In terms of how I would like to see such a stipend play out, personally, I think it should be, at least for the IMC, it's hard for me to judge for the GMC, should only be to certain positions. I don't think every member needs a stipend. The committees are large enough that the work tends to filter down to just a couple people for the bulk of it. And whether that's handled within the members or within the committees or is more prescriptive is up to the community. I think it's fine either way. For example, within the IMC, I think the treasurer and perhaps a BD or two positions is reasonable, as those tend to have more like part-time job hour commitments. On the GMC side, perhaps it is obviously the administrator, but then perhaps there are committee leads who are in charge of doing outreach within their allocated set of grants. But yeah, the design space is open, but just glad that these discussions are happening. Speaking of the IMC, of which I serve and Mr. Langers used to serve, let's talk about that. You have recently, as well as Darren, in a way, stepped down for the IMC. Is that right?
That is correct. Yes. Yeah. So I think we kind of. So the IMC was the first management committee that we put together, and I think being the conservative, people that we are, we wanted to be on the management committee to make sure that things were kind of like running like smoothly. But that's paid out, and the management committees are they're their own beasts, and they're working perfectly fine. So I think the caution that we had was not necessarily not warranted, but it's relieved. We have a lot more confidence in the management committees than we did at the very, very start.
Right.
I think the issue that we have is more around. It's actually difficult to kind of like explain, but basically we've kind of like had advice that we shouldn't really be doing the IMC stuff, and that we should stick to the technical aspects of the protocol, and so that's why we're kind of like backing out of that particular element.
Yeah, it's prudent to maintain some separation between, I think, the DAO and technical entities, real world entities. So yeah, it makes sense to me. And to fill the void that's going to be left by Darren, who's the only true IMC member, Dave, of course, was just a backup signer. He didn't really have a position on the membership on the committee. Dr. Worm has joined the IMC. Dr. Worm was notable for creating, I think, what is still the best Dune board for tracking rETH stuff. If you go to his Dune page, you can find a ton of statistics, including my favorite one, which is rETH minted in the last 24 hours. And yeah, there's just a ton of information you can glean about the growth of the protocol from his Dune board. So glad to see him on board, and hope he can continue to create new information stuff for the IMC. That's one thing that I think would be very helpful for the wider community, is just more information about ways to utilize rETH.
Yes, I don't know how many people I've sent Dr. Worm's Dune dashboard to.
Right.
It would be in the hundreds, I would imagine.
Yeah, no, it's wonderful, wonderful stuff. So lastly, on the governance side of things, the GMCs made some splashes when they announced their decision to allocate a proportion of each inflation period towards LUSD and USDC. This is out of a budgetary precaution to make sure that they can, moving forward, pay out reasonably, as there's always been some conflict between payments in RPL and USDC in relation to ask price originally and payout price and unit conversions. So to help alleviate a little bit of that headache, having reserves in both the USD stablecoins and RPL makes a lot of sense. LUSD specifically garnered some media attention, given that the GMC is sort of offering some credibility to the stablecoin. LUSD is made by the Liquidity protocol and is immutable. ETH is the only acceptable asset and is a CDP-backed stablecoin, so it is highly resilient. The only downsides really are that it's so resilient that it tends to depeg upwards. So in times of liquidations, the LUSD peg drifts up, and it incentivizes some MEV shenanigans to arbitrage it back. But overall, it is a semi-stable coin, whereas USDC is a truly stable coin. But great to see the GMC diversifying and supporting decentralized assets in the process. In the world of integrations, we have a whole slew of things, as per the usual. First on our docket today is that Raft V2 is live, which includes the ability to mint their stablecoin R with rETH. Raft V1, I believe, launched without this possibility, so it's nice to see that being enabled there. The debt cap is 25 million R, and the minimum collateral ratio is 120%, which would enable some decently high leverage if that is up your alley. The other stablecoin from this week is Libras. So if you're paying attention, you might wonder why Libra is here since Libra, since rETH was already enabled for minting of EUSD. Well, Libra has released their new stablecoin called PEUSD, which is their multi-chain, cross-chain version of their product. So now you can use rETH to mint that across chains, which is pretty cool. I believe... No, yeah, that's all for that. DeFi Saver is a major protocol that serves as a front end for protocols like MakerDAO, Aave, and they provide a bunch of recipes, essentially pre-written utilization patterns between different smart contracts with some added logic to give you some better or safer returns. For example, they have an automated leverage staking dApp that you can, within a few clicks, lever up your rETH against ETH to earn accelerated income, assuming the Aave borrow rate is favorable. They also include in their suite of products liquidation protection, which is better than not having it, but is not guaranteed to work from what I've heard about. So don't rely on it, but it might save you if you don't pay attention to your health factor.
A quick intermission here. Maybe we can just quickly ask one or two questions that are coming from trading, especially from WAC, as it's more of a question for Langers about hiring and the latest situation there.
Yes. So, so the lawyers took a while to get back the contract and all that sort of thing. That's all done now. We're just finalizing that. So it is going to be. We've done all that negotiation stuff. We just need to send over the contract to make sure that the person's happy with that, and then we'll be getting them on board once they've kind of done their notice period. So it is progressing. Again, unfortunately, like Singapore caused a kind of like a delay in that process, but that is still progressing.
Awesome, yeah. Lawyers can take some time to get things clear, as Dipsy, I'm sure, can attest to. But glad to know that we should be getting that person onboarded soon enough. And can you remind us again what their general responsibilities will be?
So it's a senior dev role, and well, we tend to hire kind of like seniors anyway. It's a senior dev role, and they'll be doing they'll mostly be working with Joe on the smart node. But this particular candidate has kind of like smart contract experience as well. So they're very handy from that perspective. So they may actually kind of like bounce between the two, depending on where the kind of like the work is, which would be fantastic because, you know, both Joe and Kane are extremely productive, but they could do with some extra kind of like support and capacity on either of those two things. So yeah, so basically they'll be kind of across the smart node and a bit of the contract stuff as well.
That is wonderful to hear. Wow, I'm sure that'll be a great asset to both sides. Is this person already familiar with Rocket Pool, or do you want to save the details for later?
I'll save the details for later.
Got it. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to their onboarding. Wow, the Rocket Pool team slowly but consistently is expanding. It'll be 3 people in the past 2 years with this person, right?
Yeah, I think so. Yes.
Solid. So unless anyone else has any questions, going back to the integrations, incentives are live on the Arbitrum Gamma rETH WETH pool. Now, this is a pretty cool one because these incentives did not come from Rocket Pool, but instead came out of a Arbitrum proposal led by a number of different protocols, including Gamma Swap, Gauntlet, and I believe Uniswap as well together. Essentially, the collection of these groups have decided to share a proposal for better effectiveness, honestly. And in this proposal, Gauntlet will be managing the incentive allocation to maximize volume on Arbitrum based on Uniswap v3 managers, most notably Gamma. I believe only Gamma, though I'm not sure. What this means for the users is not a whole lot. Pretty much for you on the user end, you're just going to see rETH having new options across the spectrum for you to earn yield. Potentially some pretty high yield, as Gauntlet will be managing both the gamma ranges and what pairs to incentivize. So Gauntlet is some of the biggest brains in the space. Usually they are heads of risk, but they focus a lot on liquidity. And so I'm sure they'll do a good job trying to attract liquidity and volume to Arbitrum. So definitely a good place to park your rETH if you are looking. I believe the IMC will also be offering some matching incentives on that pool. So that'll also boost things up a bit. Notional V3, whose CEO recently featured on a launchpad with our beloved WAC, is now open for rETH deposits. I believe, however, this is still just the beta, or is this where?
Yeah, it's the beta release. So sorry about that background noise. V3 beta launching on Arbitrum, or I guess has launched, and there's a few options that they've outlined in terms of opportunities for liquid stakers, for rETH holders. One being to lend out rETH and earn a return on that. Or there's also option 2, which is a liquidity option, and then also hyper staking or leveraged staking with rETH. So a few different options. Maybe worth checking out the beta launch of Notional V3.
Sweet. The Notional team are super active and really responsive. So if you have any questions, make sure you reach out to them. Here's an interesting one. Pith Protocol, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, is a competitor to Chainlink, and they provide oracles.
Not sure.
Yeah. I'm going with Pith. But yeah, they are a competitor to Chainlink and are a decentralized oracle network that is now supporting RPL USD. So if you are a decentralization maxi and you dislike Chainlink's grip on the entire DeFi ecosystem, you now could have a different price feed. Pith has its own set of risks associated with it. I'm not privy, or I don't personally know how they calculate their price to report. So it may or may not be more vulnerable to manipulation than a Chainlink Oracle. So yeah, if you are a developer using it, I'm sure you are aware of the risk parameters, but keep those in mind. But great to see them adopting RPL.
Yeah, exactly. That's the point, right? It was news to me and not something that was planned in conjunction with us at all. But yeah, again, it's always good to see these protocols kind of proactively including support for RPL or rETH. And yeah, as Jasper's obviously said, there's always pros and cons with any protocol out there. So this price feed as an alternative to Chainlink is no different.
Speaking of Chainlink, I know they like to be secret, but how have discussions around CCIP been progressing?
So this is one that I can talk about without risking sharing any secrets because I'm not directly involved, but I do know that Langers and Grant have been on a few calls, both like calls, Teams or whatever remotely, but also in Singapore. Chainlink did have a bit of a presence there. So the guys caught up in Singapore, and I would sum up the process or the progress to date by saying, yeah, it is progressing. It's still very much a work in progress. Yeah, from what I've heard, it's maybe one of a couple of different options that might be out there in terms of cross-chain, and obviously being Rocket Pool, we don't want to jump into kind of necessarily backing one horse over the other options. Better to kind of see how things develop. I think that's the main approach. But again, yeah, not being part of these conversations means that I am free to kind of speculate, but there are certainly discussions ongoing with the Chainlink team. So watch this space.
For those
for somebody who wasn't involved, Mav managed to summarize that quite well. The only thing I'd add is we're very much in discovery, not kind of like
mute button, Jasper.
Say again? Wait, what?
You might have bumped the mute button, but I think you were good just then.
I thought Darren was speaking.
Yeah. So we're very much in discovery, is what I would say. Not really in kind of like we're trying to figure out whether there's a way to kind of like work together. And as Mav pointed out, there are actually a few different options on the table in terms of like cross-chain stuff. So one of the things that we'll probably work with the IMC initially, but definitely opening it up to the community a bit more as well, is around like cross-chain strategy, because there's a few things to kind of think about in terms of like cross-chain stuff. When I say cross-chain, I'm probably more talking about cross L2s rather than actual cross-chain stuff, but other people have different opinions. It's kind of like what mechanisms that we use for it, because there is this tendency at the moment. So at the moment, a lot of it is like liquidity bridges and that sort of thing, which are really good. There are kind of like there are new kind of options that are coming out to not to simplify it, but there are a bit kind of benefits with doing different approaches. So we're kind of trying to map that out a little bit, and Grant's going to kind of help me with that as well, so that we can kind of get a little bit of like an info sheet for the IMC initially, but then probably the community to kind of see what directions we like in terms of the cross-chain strategy stuff.
Speaking from the IMC, we spend quite a bit on Hop protocol to enable good liquidity for quick bridging between Ethereum, Arbitrum, Optimism. But again, it is a substantial expense. So if CCIP, I believe they work on a burn mint model through their own Oracle network, could alleviate some of the cost, would definitely be something for the IMC to look into.
Yeah, there's pros and cons. So we'll try and go through those with everyone.
Right. Speaking purely from my own personal opinion, I've always had a dislike for how strongly reliant DeFi is on Chainlink, and in some respects, for how long they took to allow us to onboard, even though we had great volumes. But that is old history now. Speaking of Chainlink, they have announced an RPL USD price feed on Optimism. So the price feeds continue to roll out. Uh, RPL and Optimism is a great addition for low-cost DeFi services that'll probably now develop there to make use of your RPL.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Say again?
Yeah, that's awesome to kind of see it. I mean,
Yeah.
Wherever those Chainlink feeds are, people use them. When I say people, I mean protocols use them, and so there does tend to be a proliferation of like integrations once a feed kind of goes on.
Right. It's like opening a new path or skill tree. Suddenly all the things come out. Lastly, on our integration side of things today, Zero Liquid announced that they will be integrating rETH. Now, Zero Liquid is a Alchemix X, or similar to Alchemist loan system in that it is automatically repaying liquidation-free loans against rETH. So Alchemix has been under the radar for a while, but they pioneered the idea of loans that pay themselves off using the yield from your yield-bearing asset that underlines or underwrites the loan. Since then, there has not been too much work done on that, but I'm curious to see where Zero Liquid can take it.
Yeah, this is the sort of kind of like, I guess, innovation that that's really exciting. The things you can do with liquid staking tokens. So yeah, it's really good to see.
It's crazy. Once you have a little actual yield in a token, suddenly a whole industry of things becomes possible. So moving on now to media and marketing. The most important or most notable event over the past couple of weeks for media is definitely the 3.5 conventions that the team went through. And before Darren showed up for the call, me and Mav were talking at length about the atmosphere and those conventions. Is there anything, Darren, that you want to mention or any particular standout from that travels?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I probably said this on the last one, but ETH Singapore was quite small, but obviously being an ETH event, there were so many people that knew us, and we got to meet node operators and protocols and all of that sort of thing. So it was actually, although it was quite small, it was quite concentrated. Token was like the opposite. It was absolutely massive and very diluted like this. But at the same time, a lot of people were there. So I didn't actually. I think I saw half of a talk. I spent most of my time outside the venue, talking to people because we'd kind of like hook up on Telegram and then meet up in person. And also, not interestingly, but probably obviously, there was a big contingent of people from that location as well, or that from the kind of like Asia region. So that was really good because we don't actually get to speak to those guys that much. I was on a few panels which were interesting and always kind of like fun. And I did a talk at ETH Singapore. The last one that we went to was Digital Asset Week, which was near the end. That was a very different thing. We thought we were going to be a complete fish out of water for that because it's very, very corporate. But we went along mainly to kind of educate ourselves on what's going on the kind of like banking side of things. And it was actually more interesting than we thought it was going to be. And probably we were less fish out of water than we expected. So there was less. There were less hoodies. I can definitely tell. So from that perspective, we were definitely out of a depth from that perspective. But it was very interesting. There was what they call kind of like crypto native. There was actually a bit of an overlap between what at the conference they were calling like digital assets, which are, you know, things like real world assets and all that sort of thing. And then there's kind of like crypto, where crypto is kind of like a subset of the digital asset space, but the digital asset space is much, much larger because it kind of like takes consideration, you know, any asset that could be digitized. There was a lot of talk about stable coins, and lots of presenters from, you know, people from like HSBC, Citibank, Deutsche Bank, you know, Standard Charter, Moody's, so just heaps and heaps of people. You kind of get a sense that everyone's running their own race. There are definitely people that are kind of quite far ahead. Some people are way behind. There's kind of talk of, so everyone's building silos, funnily enough. Their own little kind of like walled gardens, but they're talking about interoperability. Mav and I were kind of figuring out which meme to use, because it's kind of like the meme with the Matrix meme, where it says, "What if I told you, you know, when you're ready, you don't have to dodge bullets?" It's, you know, what if I told you if you use a public blockchain, you won't have to deal with interoperability? So it was kind of, but there was talk. There was talk. I mean, it was skeptical talk, but there was talk of like permissioned public blockchain deployments, and that sort of thing. So no, it was all very, very interesting, and it kind of set the stage a little bit on where we are. Like DeFi is very, very special. Like it's nascent. I think everyone kind of can acknowledge that it's nascent, but it really is quite special. You know, every element of the banking stack is kind of almost represented in DeFi, and so, you know, you can kind of like see where that goes eventually. But yeah, we'll see. I don't know. It's a very it was more interesting than I thought it was going to be.
It's also definitely important to get Rocket Pool's name out there to these institutions, since at some point it seems inevitable that they too will want to join in on the staking pie, and it's not entirely clear exactly how that plays out, right? In the most optimistic of futures, we could see them getting exposure to Rocket Pool RE through like some intermediary that handles that for them. Unlikely, but on a long enough time frame, we might see that play out once these decentralized assets have proven their worth and enough centralized staking platforms have collapsed, which is sort of their inevitable outcome, right? The only outcome for a centralized staking platform is either collapse or to be dissolved towards a decentralized one.
Yeah, I mean, you'd be surprised to a certain degree. So we're definitely way off from banks. we're definitely like way off from the banking sector, but like funds and asset managers and that sort of thing, some of those are actually looking. Well, they're definitely looking at crypto assets in general, and staked ETH being one of the probably, I guess, like least risky. I'm probably doing air quotes there, but the least risky of the assets. They are kind of, yeah. There definitely, it was definitely a lot more interest than we thought there was on that side of things. So I don't know. We'll see. It's very very new. There's a long way to go, but there was definitely kind of, it was more interesting than we thought it was going to be.
It'll be cool to see if CCIP vision plays out the way they wanted to, where they become the hub for, as you mentioned, the digital asset space outside of crypto. If they can become sort of a transaction settlement layer of sorts for tokenized real world assets, stable coins, so on, and Rocket Pool is already presented there, it positions us well for growing global recognition. So yeah, glad to see that the conferences went well.
Yeah, it's going to be extreme. I will tell you now, it's going to be extremely interesting if jurisdictions get the act together and regulate stablecoins, that whole area is going to be extremely interesting to watch.
It seems just fun to blow.
Yeah. There was some there were some great quotes from the conference. I'll try to, but I've got to jump off because I've got to go to the stand up. But one of the great quotes was that Korea actually stopped their CDBC program because they recognized that what would probably happen is that everyone would withdraw all their money from banks and get the CDBC instead, because the CDBC is backed by the government, whereas the banking deposits are eventually backed by the government, but
yeah.
you have to go through the bank first. So, I mean that's kind of quite jurisdictional. Yeah, that's quite in Korea, I think, and in a lot of Asia, digital money is actually very much more prevalent than anywhere else. But yeah, that was kind of like an interesting tidbit that we picked up.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a true sentiment even in America, where FDIC insurance only extends to the first 100,000, whereas I'm assuming if you had that in GovCoin, FedCoin, that insurance would extend much higher, if not to the entire amount. So I can see why the banking lobbyists would not be too happy, and why the banking lobbyists or banking industries are also the ones that are looking to make stablecoins. So, elsewhere in the world, Chainflow, an infrastructure provider, has announced that they launched their first rocket pool node. Um, I believe Chainflow provides infrastructure for some other places as well. But yeah, just great to see more people adopting rocket pool infrastructure.
Yeah, and they also reference about seeing kind of rocket pool 7 years ago, which I guess is true, was around back then. That was one of a few things that usually surprise people at Singapore. The 7 years ago plus 7 or so team members, plus of course a whole lot of support from the DAO, but also the fact that one of a few small cases where there was a project or a protocol there not looking for funding. Those are the three main things that tended to surprise people. But yeah, haven't been in touch with Chainflow. As you've said, they seem to be a provider in the space, but at the end of the day, Rocket Pool is permissionless, and they've decided to spin up. They said their own Rocket Pool mini pool, so that's great to see. There were a couple of times that also came up at Singapore too, where people kind of asked how they would go about becoming a node operator, and the answer is, well, why are you talking to me? Just go and do it. It's that simple, which tends to surprise people.
Right.
Sorry, guys. I'm just going to jump off because I've got to go do our stand up. But it was great speaking to you, and thanks, Jasper.
Cheers, Langers. Great call. Thank you. Bye. So, as we were, we also had some recent community call appearances, including one from Sega, which is actually a protocol I'm not too familiar with. Can you tell me a little bit about them?
I was just waiting for a bit of traffic noise outside, but yeah, that was actually a very interesting call. So we had someone along from Sega who has like their background is in the option space, and it's a pretty interesting, I would say, more of a niche protocol in terms of what they're offering. Definitely more on the exotic side of DeFi products, but now available for rETH2. I won't claim to fully understand the details of everything that they have available. I guess the best comparison would be it's not dissimilar to Ribbon Finance, who the very least used to kind of have some rETH products available, maybe RPL too, and I think we had them on a community call back in the day last year.
They
But
were Ribbon Finance was one of the first major rETH integrations. They're OGs, yeah.
yeah, and regardless of whether you think these kind of option-based exotic DeFi products is something you would want to use or not, it was definitely a great example of one of the more informative and engaging guests that we've had as on these weekly community call Twitter spaces. So I'd encourage people to, well, for now, you can always pick up the recording on the Rocketpool Twitter while we work on getting that uploaded into YouTube.
I definitely encourage that. We also had a live Singapore update and bi-weekly from you guys, so that sounds like a pretty good listen as well. Metronome published content about looping rETH on their own lending platform. As always, lending includes liquidation risk and can result in you losing money, unfortunately. We actually saw this past fortnight Swell's token, SWEETH, depeg at its worst about 3.6%, including a single day drop of about 2%, which, if you are leveraged to the max that some of these platforms allow, that will trigger a liquidation. So yeah, be careful, but definitely do your research because there are some good yields to be found. We had some positive responses to Rocket Pool as a sort of a byproduct of around a ecosystem wide almost, but certainly a large front sort of pushing back against Lido, somewhat in response to a recent interview that Danny Ryan gave with Evan Van Ness about the dangers of liquid staking and specifically Lido's continued domination. If you haven't listened to that podcast, I highly recommend it. I believe it's on the ETH Builders podcast. But yeah, what was highlighted was Rocket Pool's safety in comparison to Lido in terms of much lower market dominance, as well as the permissionless validator set. So definitely appreciate Ethan S's kind words.
Certainly lots of content out there on Twitter, not necessarily all relevant or appropriate to link in the bi-weekly update, but if you are a regular Twitter user, you probably would have seen a good chunk of it, if not all. But yeah, a lot of discussions continuing to take place. I guess this is kind of a continuation over the past few months. Every now and again, it pops up again of the impact that liquid staking could potentially have on the security of Ethereum. Obviously, that's pretty important. At the end of the day, it's all nice to get a reward from staking, but it's also something that's quite important because it really ensures that Ethereum can continue to exist. So it's a responsibility that we should all take seriously, whether that's liquid staking or running a node. And yeah, certainly anytime that topic comes up, Rocket Pool tends to get a mention. Obviously, in a positive light in terms of the contributions towards all of that.
Yeah, there's been a few writing pieces about staking as overall recently that have featured Rocket Pool positively. Definitely cool to see. One of those outlets was Masari, whose Kunal Joel, Kunal posted a very thorough analysis around the ecosystem, including a price prediction for RPL, which is substantially higher than the current price. So this is, of course, just an analyst opinion, not our own. So take that with a grain of salt. But cool to see the high praise he had for the Rocket Pool network.
Yeah, I met Kunal in Singapore actually. I can't remember if it was a Singapore token. I think it was a token, but yeah, bumped into him. So another example of putting faces to names. All these people that you know or know of, and then finally meeting them in person. So yeah, it was good, and yeah, great coverage, of course, as is usual from Masari, not just about Rocket Pool, but staking in general. So anytime they put out some content, it is worth a read.
Definitely echo that. They have some pretty great pieces, although they can depend on who the author is. I think Kunal is one of their best writers. He also did a number of great pieces on MakerDAO earlier this year. So yeah, shout out to him. That brings us to the end of today's agenda. Do you want to give us some insight onto some upcoming events?
Yeah, so we obviously have our next community call listed in Discord. It's a bit of an earlier one next week. We'll have a guest from Connext joining us, talking about some cross-chain stuff. So that should be interesting and a very relevant topic. And then later on, the following week, we will obviously have our own weekly community call that will be uploaded as well. But Langers also has an opportunity to participate as a guest on Twitter Space from another protocol. So that's also listed there. Once we get some details, we'll update that. But that might be something worthwhile tuning into as well. And then kind of mentioned this on the previous call as well, but in real life events, we have Istanbul coming up very soon. I think that's about a month and a half away, if not less, which is quite terrifying, to be honest, because Denver also, while a little bit further away, we do have kind of the holidays, Christmas and New Year in between, and there's work to be done there too. So yeah, Rocket Pool will be participating at both in Istanbul, sponsoring the ETH Staker meetup, and then still TBC in terms of some of the other stuff that's happening, including the Staking Rewards Staking Summit. But we will be in town, so hopefully be able to see some of you guys there. If not, in Denver, of course, next year.
That sounds like a busy and an exciting schedule. Looking forward to it. So on today's call, which was just me, Mav, and Langers, we went in depth on the SmartNode V2 and some of the exciting features that'll be included. If you are running Block Native's Relay, make sure you switch off of it. In terms of R&D, we discussed the conferences that the team attended. We also discussed the new voting system, the potential for a security council, and much more. In terms of governance, we discussed the possibility of a GMC member stipend, the departure of Langers and Dave, as well as the joining of Dr. Worm. We also mentioned how the GMC is deciding to allocate some of its monthly inflation to Liquidity USD and USDC. In terms of integrations, we covered Raft now allowing R to be minted against rETH on V2. Libra's PEUSD Omni-Chain Stable now accepts rETH as collateral. DeFi Saver, the front end for several lending markets, now supports rETH in their new leverage staking dApp. Incentives are live on Gamma's rETH WETH Arbitrum pool in collaboration with both Arbitrum and Gauntlet. Notional V3 is now supporting rETH on their testnet beta. Pith, the competitor to Chainlink, deployed an RPL USD price feed, and Chainlink themselves deployed an RPL USD price feed on Optimism. Zero Liquid announced their own clever rETH lending platform. In terms of media and marketing, we had Chainflow, an infrastructure provider, announce that they launched a Rocket Pool node. We had Metronome publish a piece about how rETH can be leveraged on their platform, and a slew of positive feedback as part of a wider rapprochement of Lido. Masari themselves put out a pretty substantial piece talking about the staking ecosystem and their bullcast for RPL. That was today's call. Thank you all for joining, and I'll see you on the next one.
Thanks for hosting, Jasper, and thanks to everyone for listening in. We'll see you again soon.
Cheers.